let's get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Welcome to In the Clouds. I am your host, Stu Miniman, and we are here August 11th. This will actually be the only episode that we're doing in August because I have a little bit of PTO. Hopefully you have been having some time over the summer to enjoy the very hot weather we've had in many parts of the world in the Northern Hemisphere and recharge and relax. But we have a lot going on here at Red Hat. I'm really happy to welcome to the program Steve Gordon, who's a Senior Director in Product Management. Those of you that watched the program might remember, it was hard for me to believe. It was 5 months ago we had Mike Barrett on to talk about everything in OpenShift 4.10. Well, here we are. OpenShift 4.11 is what we are going to be talking about today. The big highline topic is the cloud marketplaces. But Steve, welcome to the program. If you wouldn't mind giving our audience a little bit about your background. You know, you've been with Red Hat for quite a while. You and I crossed paths before I joined Red Hat. But yeah, give us a little bit, if you would, what brought you here today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, first of all, Stu. Much appreciated. And as you mentioned, yeah, I've been at Red Hat I actually got my my automated email the other day. It's been 12 years. So time flies when you have new and exciting challenges to work on the way. But currently I'm a lead for our product management team in hybrid platforms. So working on OpenShift and really OpenShift and edge scenarios for my team, as well as our OpenStack and virtualization businesses as well. So a lot of different moving parts in that piece, but just really focused right now on trying to make our customers successful in a number of different verticals with OpenShift as a hybrid cloud platform.
Awesome. And Steve, a lot of our audience is familiar with the what's new and what's next videos. So, the product managers go through just an immense amount of detail, and there's so much that goes into it. When I used to track OpenShift, it was, you would hear all the updates and then like, oh, wait, yeah, that's right. What was in like just the Kubernetes itself. So, OpenShift 4.11 corresponds to Kubernetes 1.24, but there's a lot of things in there. Some of the things near and dear to your heart we're going to cover. But it's an interesting milestone too, just because from an OpenShift standpoint, 4.11, the 4.0 release was a big architectural change. 3.11 was the last one in the previous piece. So Steve, before we get into the pieces, just if you could give our audience a little bit of that, architectural discussion. Something we get questions all the time is like, all right, going from 3 to 4 was pretty challenging. We learned a lot from that, and 4 still has a lot of runway to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one of the things throughout the life of OpenShift, the product, there have been changes we have made over time, and certainly over this last decade or so that I've been at Red Hat, there's been a lot of changes in the ecosystem that kind of forced our hand a little bit there, and trying to keep track of those trends. The original OpenShift product, and then the switch to Docker, and then ultimately Kubernetes in 3, and then as you mentioned with OpenShift 4, another big architectural leap forward in terms of integrating some of those technologies that we acquired through CoreOS into the platform, and really trying to bring more of a automation approach to deploying Kubernetes, and not just Kubernetes, as you mentioned, but also now, increasingly this rich ecosystem of both Red Hat provided and third-party operators built around Kubernetes using various cloud-native technologies, which is where we see customers kind of extracting more and more value from the platform. So there's been, a lot of change along the way there. And, as we look at OpenShift 4 at the moment, though, I think we're really hitting our stride with that mission of trying to enable a true hybrid cloud platform that's available on as many different footprints as possible. And we'll talk about some of those, new changes that are enabling that as we go through. That we're really pretty comfortable with where we're at with the OpenShift 4 kind of architecture still, and still moving forward with that at this stage. And definitely cognizant of helping customers move through those OpenShift 4 releases and really achieve what they want to achieve with those new releases as well.
Yeah, well, actually, we'll talk in a little bit. There's some items in technical preview that, I think some people from the outside would be like, wow, this is some significant changes that are coming. Is that going to be a major release? But let me put a pin in that, and let's bring it back to kind of the headline item. AWS, Azure, Google all have marketplaces. Red Hat was about 2 years ago launched its own marketplace. To be honest, Steve, when I joined Red Hat, I was a little surprised that Red Hat did not have products in the marketplace before. We had native offerings with Azure, with the Azure Red Hat OpenShift, with AWS. We launched a little over a year ago Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS. So why now? What does it mean? The OpenShift product line available in today, the AWS and Azure, and coming later this year, the Google marketplaces.
Yeah. I think it's fair to say that it's a functionality that customers have really been looking for. Particularly those with large cloud committed spend deals that they want to use on various things they provision in those clouds. And it's certainly an exciting ability now that you can go into, right now the Amazon and the Azure marketplaces, and in the near future the Google one as well, to basically choose your flavor of OpenShift and provision it right there, and have it all come through as a single bill from that cloud provider and burn down that committed spend. And that's something that's very much been asked for, and now we've really hit our stride in being able to provide that on 2 out of the big 3 straight out of the gate, and soon the 3rd one as well. I think that's a very exciting way for customers to think about provisioning OpenShift. And obviously, again, if they have those existing agreements in place, it's a very low friction way to deploy OpenShift as well and manage it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you hit on such a key point, that frictionless way of consuming things. That was, the early days we talked about, hey, if I need to get something down, I go to the cloud, I swipe a credit card, and it's super easy. If you could give us a little bit compare contrast, we have the cloud services jointly engineered, jointly supported with the cloud providers already, and the marketplace is a little bit different.
Yeah. So with the marketplace, as I mentioned, I can go in there, even on my individual account, I can do this. I go in, I can see, the OpenShift Kubernetes engine, the OpenShift container platform, different variations at different price points, and priced into that, I can see the split of, what is the Red Hat cost there, what is the Amazon infrastructure cost. But ultimately, I can click that, go through the deployment stage. But after that, there's still a component of what I deploy and manage on that that's still, for me to self-manage effectively. The difference with something like the Red Hat OpenStack for Amazon Web Services, or the Azure Red Hat OpenShift offering, those offerings come with full SRE-backed management from Red Hat for those clouds. And I think, when I talk about that hybrid cloud vision, when we talk a lot about the footprints, right? Like where can I deploy it? I think also having those options for how it's managed and kind of different consumption models is also a critical part of really delivering on that hybrid cloud vision. And that's just an example of, we continue to strive to make self-managed OpenShift available in more places and, lower friction, but we also want to provide that fully managed experience as well, wherever we can.
Yeah, great point, Steve. I know I've talked to certain customers. They love the idea of the managed OpenShift to be able to shift things to the SRE, but there might be some reason that they need to have something done a certain way. The way I kind of simplify it usually is, you're given OpenShift, there's like 20 knobs and they have fine-grained tuning that you can do on it. If you go to the SRE team, it's more like 5 knobs and it's not quite as fine-tuning that you can do on that. So there might be some reason that you've done something in your own environment. You want to replicate that in other environments that you can't do the same. The other piece, just moving to a cloud marketplace makes that billing like everything else in the cloud. So it's really more that SaaS model, that consumption model. And that is a shift. And I mean, there are, Steve, from a product standpoint, there's things that we need to make sure that everything is ready for that consumption billing, correct?
Yeah. There's a lot of work on the back end to make all of that flow through correctly. And I'd be lying if I said that some of that wasn't challenging for us, but I think it's really important change that we're making as a company to, again, enable just different consumption models and enable that choice that customers are looking for.
Awesome. Yeah, Red Hat, obviously, lot of the cloud pieces. I talked a couple months ago, talked to Gunnar from the RHEL side about all the things they've done. Of course, there's lots of RHEL in all the public clouds, and there is a shift. There are updates that have to happen, but we've been working for years to make that happen. Okay. Steve, you talked about the hybrid mission that we've had for more environments. So let's talk about kind of the new installers and the updates. I think the big headline one that get people's attention is Nutanix, kind of progressing the partnership that we announced last year.
Yeah. So we've had support, as per that partnership already for OpenShift on Nutanix in kind of a deeply self-managed or user provisioned infrastructure flow type approach to deployment, which is a little bit manual in some ways. What we announced in OpenShift 4.11 is we now have a full stack automation or installer provisioned infrastructure flow for deploying on Nutanix, which is basically a push button way to do it effectively. You provide a couple of basic parameters and you can deploy on Nutanix AOS. And we support both the short and long-term releases of that Nutanix platform as well. So you have both those options there. There are still a couple of manual things right now in terms of the credentials integration, and the storage operator is still a day 2 thing. But we are working closely with the Nutanix team to bring more of those into the day 0 flow as well. But I know, lots of customers and folks out there very excited about having that full stack automation based approach to deploying on Nutanix. And again, just maybe it's a footprint that typically expanding these footprints at first it's maybe slightly more manual, and then we try and remove as much of that friction as possible. And this is a great step in that direction for customers out there who are trying to bring Nutanix and OpenShift together in one place.
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned you do edge, and you've got OpenStack and virtualization. And Nutanix, of course, made big moves from the virtualization standpoint. So an important partnership. Maybe could you just give us a little bit of an update, from a virtualization standpoint? The last 2 months, your team, I have been pulled into, I'd say, many more discussions than we might have had in previous quarters. So maybe give us kind of a holistic view what's happened in the virtualization world as it ties into what we do on the Red Hat side.
Yeah, so I think it's fair to say that already going into this year, we had increased interest in some of these concepts that have emerged around both Kubernetes native virtualization or container native virtualization, ways of basically bringing VMs along when we're doing application modernization, and maybe we're not ready to modernize all of those pieces, or some of those pieces simply can't run not in a VM right now. And there's different reasons for that. Some have custom kernels and things like that. So we're already seeing some excitement around that coming into the year. Obviously, lots of news on the Broadcom VMware side of things, which I think is making people kind of just relook at the overall landscape through a different lens. And I know lots of my peers out there at other companies having mixed feelings about some of that, which definitely feel for some of them at this time. But at the same time, it is an opportunity for customers to really look at, we've had a probably good 10 to 15 year run with the current state of the virtualization landscape. And then what is the approach that's going to work for me for that next 10 to 15 years that we're entering now, where we see a greater mix of application containers and really cloud native technologies entering both the data center and cloud use cases. So, to that end, we've continued to, as you say, have many conversations with customers and making customers successful with OpenShift virtualization as a capability of the OpenShift platform. We've continued to expand the types of guests we support. We have the RHEL 9 and Windows 11 support in OpenShift 4.11. And again, OpenShift virtualization is just part of the product. It's there. You turn the operator on if you want to use it, and you're good to go, basically. But an exciting capability for customers who are trying to think about how they go forward with those virtual machines. The other thing I'll mention is we've also, again, in the vein of providing flexibility and options where it makes sense. We've continued to advance Windows containers as well for customers who want to go down that path for some of their Windows workloads, and adding Windows Server 2022 support to Windows containers in the 4.11 release as well. So we have continued the trajectory in terms of supporting Windows workloads that we've always had. I mean, I joined the company originally working on our virtualization offerings, and we've always focused on making sure that we can help customers run those workloads as well. So, definitely interesting times in virtualization. And then, be remiss of me also not to mention, the other use case that's out there that is definitely more in the kind of net new use case is the OpenShift sandbox container stuff, or Kata containers, like some of these technologies for application sandboxing using virtualization. And, we've continued to advance that as well, and starting to see real customer interest in that, obviously, particularly in heavily regulated industries where they want a deeper separation between tenants and workloads.
Yeah, so Steve, that we've got no shortage of the optionality that we give customers. So, ones that want to continue running on vSphere, lots of OpenShift runs in that environment. They want to look at options like bare metal. You talked a bit about OpenShift virtualization, our partnership with Nutanix, where they are in their whole journey to modernize things. We've got a lot of options there.
Yeah, it's
Awesome.
it's a good reminder, Stu. Actually, I should also mention, obviously we have partnerships with the other hypervisor vendors. We work with them on making sure our products run well with them, and vice versa. And of course, by virtue of the open source development model, we are collaborating upstream every day with both Nutanix and VMware in our respective communities. And it's always great to see those working relationships in the open communities.
Yeah, but both VMware and Nutanix, great contributions in the open source world. We'll have a presence. Red Hat's a sponsor of the VMware Explore event at the end of this month, and you and I will have some of our teams attending there. So yeah, really good pieces. Anything else from kind of the installers and the environments that we want to touch on from this release?
Yeah, one thing I did want to touch in is we do have a new agent-based installer, colloquially called Billy, which we have a very early kind of dev preview available in 4.11. But the idea is to be able to have a bootable image that you can use in a completely disconnected environment to bootstrap an OpenShift cluster in place without needing an additional Bastion node. So that's been developed, based on feedback, particularly from some of the edge and public sector customers who are interested in bootstrapping OpenShift clusters on minimal hardware in the field. So it's an exciting new capability. It's definitely an initial step in terms of what's available in 4.11, but if people are interested in that kind of provisioning approach, then I'd definitely encourage them to check that out and give us feedback that this is the perfect time to help us define the direction of that over the next couple of releases.
Yeah, Steve, great point. I always love every time I see the new release, there's the long list of how many of the features that we have are brought from the customer standpoint. So, a lot of what we do, Red Hat, always we're working in the communities, we're working with the upstream. So, it's not, we don't usually just be like, oh, hey, our engineers thought of something really cool. Here's this awesome technology, you should use it. It's customer driven, community supported. We have customers lined up to do it. So one of the really big things that's in OpenShift 4.11 is a technology preview of something called hosted control plane. So if you would explain a little bit this concept, I know some of these concepts have been talked about at KubeCon by some of the people, but as I teased earlier, a significant architectural change, but still staying within the purview of what we're doing. So that is the setup.
Yeah. So if we talk, before we think about hosted control planes, it's perhaps useful to reflect on, how does my control plane look today for most Kubernetes users and OpenShift users, which is, whether I'm in the cloud or I'm on bare metal, I would have, or in virtualization on-prem for that matter, I would have typically 3 nodes for high availability allocated to, these are my control plane nodes. Those nodes, because they have etcd and other things running in them, they do have certain kind of IO constraints associated with them and so on. So I'd have those 3 nodes dedicated for each cluster that I'm running, and both in the cloud or in those other footprints I mentioned. Like, that is kind of an expensive thing if I'm someone who's running a lot of clusters. What hosted control planes enables, and it's based on a project called Hypershift, is it enables me to consolidate the hosting of the control planes on less nodes. So the idea is that I would have a central hub or pool where I'm running my control plane nodes consolidated. And you can, particularly if you're imagining these are maybe large machines, but they're hosting many Kubernetes control planes, and then my worker nodes are then still farmed out elsewhere in terms of the different infrastructure footprints. So on Amazon, they would be a virtual machine. On-prem, it might be a bare metal node. But the idea is basically to make it more efficient to run many Kubernetes clusters, and particularly, if you're someone who's looking for many small Kubernetes clusters, and maybe you're giving each developer a cluster or something like that, then this greatly enhances the efficiency with which you can do that. It's also something we ourselves will be deploying in our managed services as a way for us to improve our efficiency and then ultimately help customers via that mechanism. But yeah, it's a pretty cool idea. It's obviously a big change to the architecture and how we think about doing multiple clusters. But yes, it's available as tech preview in 4.11. One of my colleagues wrote a great blog about it with diagrams of kind of how all this fits together. But yeah, it's an exciting next step for us in terms of just how to help customers who are doing that task of deploying and managing many OpenShift clusters, and both useful in the cloud, but also in the world I tend to work on with some of the on-prem and edge customers. That cost of 3 bare metal nodes per cluster for the control surface really adds up in kind of a data center environment, for example, and the ability to consolidate that a little bit and kind of increase the management span that you get from the hardware is really exciting for those users as well.
Yeah, a lot of really good stuff there, Steve. Yeah, it reminds me, conversations I've had with Joe Fernandez, conversations I've had with the SRE team. The nice thing about us supporting lots of different footprints and lots of different environments is we learn from those environments. So hearing you talk about what you just went through, I think about the journey that we went from, the going down to single node OpenShift, and you talk about what the SRE is doing. My understanding, the first place that this was really deployed was one of our managed service environments. So we something our team's controlling it, understanding it, can test it out, and the like. What will this mean from customers? I think about this re-architecture. It seems like some things, spinning up worker nodes should be able to be even a little bit faster. Are there impacts on performance that we should understand? Hopefully there's, positive economics when you put the pieces together. What will it mean from the people when this is fully rolled out?
Yeah, when it's fully rolled out, certainly, as I mentioned, there is that just plain efficiency aspect of the control plane surface. There also should be both, basically, like, part of it as well as just efficiency in terms of cost is, yes, as you mentioned, speed of provisioning clusters is intended to get significantly faster. There are kind of other changes in terms of how does my monitoring look in that situation and other things like that. For the customer who's just running a single cluster, maybe this is not a big deal, but for growing amount of customers who are running many clusters, those efficiency gains really add up for them a lot, and also allow them to focus their management more on that central set of control plane management nodes, and less so on the workers. And as we look at that, there's also going to be still in the plans, but more flexibility around where are those workers as well is something we're looking at as well. So, we talked a little bit about the virtualization technology. Like one of the things in that sphere is using OpenShift virtualization in that underlay effectively to carve up bare metal nodes again to support kind of more efficiency as you deploy many clusters, while still giving you an alternative solution to existing or traditional virtualization platforms.
Okay, and the hosted control plane, what are the implications if we start talking about things like multi-region or even multi-cloud, multi-environment, hybrid type of places?
Yeah, we're still working through some of those challenges. Some of them, don't change a lot. So, in terms of control plane to control plane latency, Kubernetes itself has relatively strict tolerance for how far apart those can be, or how latent the connection can be. But for control plane to worker, we already actually have something in the product that we validated called remote worker nodes, and we say that can have a pretty significant latency gap between the control plane and the worker, and that's something we can again leverage in a hypershift architecture as we look at central location managing disparate worker nodes. But yeah, there's definitely still some challenges there in terms of how some of this fits together. Kubernetes, the cloud provider integration logic, still currently at least thinks of, if I said I'm deploying on AWS, for example, it'll assume that all my nodes are AWS and start, if something else pops up, it'll start trying to delete them. We have ways around that. We can deploy it as kind of an agnostic cluster, but it's definitely something we're looking at, because again, as you mentioned, like those are the kind of things that are starting to be more and more common asks, the ability to run central control plane or central control planes in this case, managing growing scales of worker nodes in edge locations, for example. So this is definitely another possibility where hypershift opens up how can we do that in an efficient way, particularly as those numbers at the scale side of things continue to grow.
Awesome. Well, definitely recommend, if you see in the chat, there's the replay of the what's new in 4.11. There's some good discussion there. Steve mentioned there's a blog going on. And since it is something in technology preview, I know one of the things we're always looking for is try it out, give us your feedback, take a look at, some of the use cases, and, really appreciate the feedback that, you the audience, can help there. Cool. All right, Steve. So, here's the tough question I have for you as the product manager. That there's so many things in 4.11. With the time we have left, what are a nugget or two else in there that you would want to share with the audience?
I think the thing I'd say is, like, obviously that what's new presentation just shows you the scope of change in the cloud native ecosystem that we are bringing together and trying to provide an integrated experience around in OpenShift. We also, GA'd some functionality that I think is pretty relevant again to those disconnected and customers in regulated environments around the OC mirror command for mirroring content for those disconnected environments. And also just, it's kind of a broad array of things, fairly deep technical knobs, but continued improvements around just flexibility of how you can influence the Kubernetes scheduler, which, again, on first look, it's kind of relatively complex set of diagrams and explanation of how you go through that. But when you start getting into kind of specialized workloads, there's a lot of flexibility we're unlocking there for how customers can both schedule initially and also scale their applications based on all kinds of things. So, included in that is just the custom metrics ability for the pod autoscaler. So you can basically scale your application based on any metric you wanted to. And I think that's one of those little things at first glance, but in terms of the power that it gives users, I expect that to be really useful.
Awesome. Yeah. And so many things, as you said, always going through the product managers, building off of some of what we had in 4.10, kind of ARM and NVIDIA, building out support, always the ongoing certifications, things like FedRAMP, there's updates there. Steve, we talk about that cloud native landscape, and we have a broad set of ecosystem we work through. I was working with a few of our community people, and we were doing an audit of what we do in the space. And what was kind of mind-blowing to me is, of course, Red Hat, is involved in hundreds of projects, but just kind of in the cloud native ecosystem, we kind of said, okay, in the last year, which were the projects that either we started, we lead, or we had significant participation in? And there were 61 projects on that list. When curious from your standpoint on product management, how do you manage the priorities of things? There are always new things coming out. There's new things being introduced in the community. There's customer demand, and we all have limited resources that we can do. So, love to hear a little bit from you as to just the the sausage making as to how we sort that out.
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is always just customer, partner, field feedback, and trying to triangulate those three things to understand, where are the trends in that information. And not even sometimes, often that doesn't mean that the customer or the partner can necessarily tell you exactly what you need to go out there and build, but they can explain to you they have a problem, and we have to go and look at kind of what is the array of things we have in the product, what is the array of projects that are out there, or is this like a net new thing that no one's really touching, and we need to go and, as you said, bootstrap a project in some cases. So we have to go through that process with any of those customer problems or partner problems we're trying to solve. And then, prioritization is maybe the hardest part of product management, is trying to figure out, what is that number one thing? What is that number two thing? And even more so, what are the things you have to say no to, right? And that's a constant challenge, but I hope with the amount of stuff we're able to deliver in a release like 4.11 that we're getting the balance of those decisions right more often than we're getting them wrong. But yeah, it's an exciting time, and obviously one of the great things about the model is, as you said, you can start or invest in 61 projects, and you can do kind of early adopter testing with some of those and figure out is this really the right thing? You get that customer hands-on experience with those, and figure out which ones we take to product. Any one of those projects in the cloud native ecosystem is a bet someone is making, and again, trying to identify trends and trying to pick up the right ones that are going to help our customers the most solve their business problems. So that's what it's all about.
Yeah, Steve, the engineering, product management, heck, everything at Red Hat, we've been quite distributed even before the pandemic, but we're starting to get to the point that customer meetings in person have started to ramp up, events are starting to come back, even some of our team meetings are doing so. Give us what's that meant to the team. I know you've even gotten to do a little bit of travel. What's it like to be able to see people face to face again?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're still just getting started with the return to travel, I'd say, in terms of particularly teams getting together and that kind of thing. But I just got back from Boston myself, and set foot in the office there in the EBC for the first time in probably 2 or 3 years, and definitely an interesting feeling doing that for the first time. But once you've done it, really glad we went there and got that additional face time. I think as you said, like I've worked distributed or remote most of my career at Red Hat, but at the same time, having those personal connections just makes everything a lot smoother in terms of your interactions. You have a better idea of where each of you is coming from, and I think it's really great that we're getting some of that back. And particularly looking forward, hopefully through the rest of the second half of the year, that we can get back to more of those kind of key customers and get those discussions going again, because as I just referred to, like, they're critical input as we try and identify these trends and business problems. And you can have your virtual meeting, and we all turn up with our materials that we've both prepared, but I don't think it's the same as maybe the conversation you might have over lunch or at the water cooler between sessions, where they identify a problem that they may not even think of it as that big a problem until you really get talking about it, and then you both realize that, hey, maybe we could help you with that.
Yeah, I hadn't through that 45 minutes. Then we made progress, and if it had been an online meeting, I don't know that we would have ever gotten through that first piece, or on emails or some shared document, it would have been something that we would have struggled to get everybody on the same page and then moving forward. So it's nice to be able to do those when we can. I mentioned the VMware Explore event at the end of the month. We're all gearing up, of course, for things like KubeCon in Detroit, where I'll be. Speaking, of course, open source, KubeCon, that community. There's a good question Dwayne posted that I'm sure both of us have some comments of. It says that because of the pace of change in the open pipeline, is the open pipeline at risk? Do we need a lot more open source engineers? So Steve, I don't think we're ever turning people down to contribute in the open source communities, and we welcome everybody there. So what are you seeing on the things you're working on?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the projects I'm exposed to, I think we still have a healthy pipeline of new people coming in and kind of companies continuing to invest in those communities. I obviously am very biased. I would always love to see even more engineers jumping into those communities, whether Red Hat employees or from other partners or just individuals out there contributing on their own as well. I think there's still hunger out there to solve problems in the open. I see just more in my telco side of my job. Recently the Linux Foundation launched this Nefio project, and just it's interesting to see all the service providers and so on jumping into that sphere, eager to try and solve a problem together. So I think that's all good things in terms of the indications we see within those communities. The one thing I'd say is it's always not something to relax about either. It's important that we ourselves keep that open source ethos, and also just the upstream first approach to building products, and also as we come up with new ideas, look at that approach to putting things out there and getting that feedback as well. Like that's a key part of how we do business. I think it's a little cliche, but the tagline that open source is one, like I think that is true, but it's also one of those things that it's happening every day, and we need to continue to make sure it happens every day. That's what gets me excited, to be honest with you, about working at Red Hat.
Yeah, it's such an important thing, Steve. Open source, like most communities, it is an ongoing effort. You can't, we don't take the foot off the pedal. We need to keep, recruiting more people in, from the vendor side, from the customer side. The more people we have, the more robust that community will be. In the security space, we've seen things like the Log4j issue. Boy, wish there were more people that were involved in some of those activities beforehand. Might have made us less vulnerable. So the door is open, and participation is wanted, and there's lots of companies that are hiring, including us, for people that want to do those sorts of things too. So excellent. Steve, I'll give you the final word. 4.11, a lot of work that went in. Here we are in the dog days of summer. So any final words about kind of the team, the process, or the release itself?
I think the main thing I would say at this point is, it's out there. You can go into your Amazon or your Azure account right now, and you can spin up a cluster of like the OKE, I think is the lowest tier available there. And even on Graviton, I believe, if you so please, when I was looking the other day. So I'd encourage people to just go check it out. I mean, it's never been easier to spin up a cluster than it is right now.
Awesome. Steve Gordon, thank you so much for joining us. As I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to skip this show in 2 weeks, but we've got an awesome lineup as we head into the fall. Next program is actually going to be a guest from Deloitte, someone that I've known through the Clouderati for a lot of years. So hope the rest of your summer goes well. Be sure to check out everything in 4.11 that Steve talked about. Look at the upcoming events that we will be at, and please, if you have any feedback on guests that we should be covering, topics you'd like to see, please do feel free to reach out to us on that. So with that, I will close it up. I'm Stu Miniman, and as always, thank you for joining us on your journey in the clouds.